Hi, welcome to Kari's Korner. Today we're going to do an interview with Jarrod L, author of The Prophecy of the Seventh Elizabeth.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how the series has evolved since you published the first book?
So the entire series is kind of just bubbled. I think in my head, at the beginning, there was this one book that was going to be written, and it was just The Prophecy of the Seventh Elizabeth. And I had pieces of that book done at the beginning portion and the end portion, and I just knew that I would be able to finish it all. It took a really long time. First book took about 5 years to create, and I really wrote a lot of it when I was sitting on airplanes, on my little Windows 6 phone, typing in everything. But when I got about halfway through the book, when I thought what I thought was halfway through the book, I realized that it was more than one book, and so ended up saying, okay, well, let me take all these ending portions, put them off to the side. Let me take the beginning portions, put them in the front. And I knew there was a centerpiece that was there, the actual one of a really big battle. I knew that we could concentrate on that centerpiece and get to a middle point and kind of stop. And then it was a good breaking point for bringing up the second book as well. So it has evolved since then, though. I originally, like I said, I thought there was one. Now there's several series out of it. And so I really think it's kind of cool because you have the E7 Prophecy series, which is the beginning of everything, but it really turned into a universe. And so during the writing of book 2, I realized that there were so many other stories that I wanted to tell within that book 2 that really didn't concentrate on the actual original story, kind of getting through it. So I had to pull those aside and decided that those would be just little mini stories of their own, and that whole series would be called the Acts of the Dragons, which really concentrates mostly on the main characters, the 4 children, and how they interact with just society, human beings, and how they make friends, and how in that same time they get into trouble, and how they get out of that trouble and how they solve it. And that kind of evolved into its own thing. And there are several of those books out, and there's several more to come. They're just all lining up. But out of that second book as well, there's a lot of other launching points that happen. So there are major characters that are introduced in the second book, which is the Agents of Acts. And there are 12 agents that were appointed by the President of the United States through with the help of the United Nations. So all the member nations contributed certain people to the team, and they were assigned through prophecy. They were assigned to help Elizabeth and the Set family kind of get through this and solve this worldwide problem of really human trafficking is what it was focused on, and that storyline or those characters ended up that they are now a separate series in its own. So a separate series would be the Agents of Acts. And the Agents of Acts kind of happens or takes place, their own series takes place after the end of book 2, but they are introduced during book 2. And then through writing the Acts of the Dragons series, more came out of that, and just something new just kind of branched out of that, and there were new characters, but the entire prophecy or the E7 universe really doesn't take place just on Earth, and never really did. It was always something that was going to take place in space or through other planets as well. But I didn't realize that those would get developed so early on. So in the early part of book 2, we start to introduce characters that are going to be in a separate series, which is the 0 to 10 series. And so if you start reading those books, there's little Easter eggs all throughout it that kind of line up all of those characters. And then that series again is huge and very special. I think everyone will really like that series because it's a little bit different than the rest of the series, but it involves everything, and there's so many cross stories, and it's just absolutely wonderful. And I guess we can talk about that later. But the series, so really, that's why we say there's many series, but just one universe, and so everything connects together. Most of the characters that you'll see inside of the book come back in one form or another, even ones that you think, well, they were just introduced a little bit. I wonder what that was about. They're coming back.
They get their own book.
They get their own book, or they show up in multiple books,
And we've already talked a little bit about like separately about the 0 to 10 series, and so that's something that's definitely very exciting. And you mentioned, that the prophecy was never something that was just totally on Earth. And that brings me kind of to a different question, which is, in all your books you include such imaginative, different species, different alien species. Where do you get your kind of inspiration for that?
Well, I mean, I think all the inspiration I get, I like to say, and it's true, I like to say it, is that God just gives me this video, this movie in my brain, and from there I start to see it. And I think the mission that I have is, how do I take that movie and translate it into words that make sense? Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting. So with that same concept, things just actually happen. I'll be writing a passage, and all of a sudden I'll think it's going to go one place, but it ends up taking me to something that I really didn't expect, and then it ends up tying back into something else that I wrote before, and it's like, how did that happen? And I don't think I'm a good enough author to do that on my own. Mm-hmm. That's why I say that I believe God just gives me these videos or these movies sitting in my head, and I just have to translate it. And that's really what happens. And it's a lot of work to kind of keep track of all those characters and all the different planets that people are from, and there's cities.
Timelines.
The timeline is a character of its own. So the timeline, I wish I could maybe write that on the front cover. Read the timeline, read the chapter headers. Don't just skip into it. The timeline is it's its full character. And not only inside of the original book, but all the different series. And it was a challenge because when you get to 0 to 10, it's in space, and so they are not on the same clock that we're on. So I studied, a lot of different things. I mean, I looked at different series that are out there. How does Star Wars keep track of time? And they kind of don't. They just kind of ignore time, I think. How does it's just things happen prior to this event is the way they handle it. And then I looked at Star Trek, and Star Trek has a really nice way of handling all their time. You have a star date, and someone understands that star date. I'm sure if there's like a Star Trek, I was going to say geek, but if there was a Star Trek geek there, they could tell you exactly what star date Jim Kirk was born and all that kind of stuff. But I needed to figure out, how do I translate that and map that back to the original prophecy and the pieces that happen in book 1 and book 2. And so I came up with a sector date, because the two places that we really concentrate on is the Sol system, which is our solar system, and then the Andromeda system. So in Andromeda, there's a place that I've created called the Chesarn Nebula, and in that nebula, there's many things, but one of the reoccurring things that you'll see inside of that book is the way that time is kept within that nebula. And there's a thing called the galactic time pulse. And the galactic time pulse was created by a race called the Triani, and they launched it out into space. It sits in a certain sector of space, and it sends out a pulse. And all planets can receive that pulse over a period of time. They know how far they are at any given time from the actual thing, so they can calculate and do some mathematical calculation and figure out what the actual sector date is. And so I started with that, and I was able to map out a pretty efficient way of keeping track of time. And it's kind of important in the books, because if you have 3 books that are talking about the different aspects of the same timeline, you need to be able to match up everything. Yeah. Because we can't just say this guy is 16 years old and this happened on a certain date. It's the pieces have to fit together. So. Yeah.
And you mentioned the time pulse being created by the Triani. So just to be clear, though, like you create all of your species.
Yep. I make them all up. I make them all up, or they come to me in whatever dream I have. And it's funny how that stuff comes up, because you'll be driving down the road, and it's like, boom, hey, that's perfect. I'm going to put that in there. Yeah. And so I create all of those characters, all of those planets, all of those cities, all of those.
Yep.
All of those
the whole universe.
Yeah. My dream is to be able to consume one of the rooms in my house and actually put the entire timeline around the entire room with things coming off of it to keep track of what exactly is what.
Yeah. You could do just big old whiteboards all around the room.
Yeah. Someone might come in and think I'm crazy, but it's still
that's fine. It's worth it. It's like, I'm not crazy. I'm just an author. It's okay. Alright, so you've created so many amazing characters and places and species and technology throughout your series. Do you have a favorite, and this is going to be a hard question, but do you have a favorite character that you've written so far? Like a story whose, like a character whose story was just really fun or really meaningful to you to write?
So I think overall my favorite character is the main character of the first series, which would be Elizabeth. So you have Elizabeth set, you have her three siblings, Rebecca, Jacob, and Matthew, and then you
based
have
off your own children.
loosely based off my own children, and then you have their parents. And I think out of all of them, although all of them are probably my favorites, my favorite four, I should say, I think Elizabeth is probably the one that I focus on the most. She is very endearing. She's very kind. She really has a firm belief of what it means to have communed with God and understand how God would like you to treat someone. You know, and I think that's really significant because one thing it shows is that you, even in the midst of trouble, I mean, she's about to go through the most horrific ordeal possible to have the battle that she has to try to win. But she goes along her life like it's just everyday and simple, you know? And it's not that it doesn't affect her, because there's points where you see that it does affect her, but the way she handles it and the way they do stuff. And it certainly doesn't mean they're perfect in any way. They get into a lot of crazy little things that they probably shouldn't get into, and they get into trouble. But I think the way she reacts to it and the way she handles it is really kind of special, and I like to try to put that across in what they do. But there's a lot of characters that I really like. There's you have to come up with animals on another planet. Yeah. You know? And so there's a animal that's called a gorsa, which when they first see this animal, they don't really know what to call it. So human nature would probably be to name it what it looks like, you know, something that you're familiar with. And so when they're naming it, it's a rhino bear is what they look at. And then after they figure out what its behavior is, then, they add some more name to it, which is just kind of cool. And I think those things are fun. And I think there's a character, one of these, the Gorsa, that I think might end up being a really a good character for me, or one that I really like, because it has its own personality, even though it's an animal. I think that's kind of cool. Yeah. And there's an entire species of, because you have to create people. They live on planets. Yeah. Species live on the planets, and so there's an entire species that I think that we've recently written, that I've recently written, and I think that it's also very special because of who they are, how they were introduced to God, and how they maintain that faith. Even though someone spent basically a day with them to explain that they are connected to God, something higher than they are, and that keeps with them for a generation, and generations and generations and generations to come. And I think that's really awesome, and they keep those values.
And I know which species you're talking about, and that's probably my favorite species that you've written.
Yeah.
And my favorite character that you've written is Rebecca. He's based off of me. So, could you talk to us a little bit about what your future plans are for the series? Because I know you want to go kind of beyond books a little bit.
So so we have the books, and let me start with kind of what's out there now.
Okay.
So you have the first book in the first series, which is a very long title, and people kind of are, I don't know if they're upset at me because the title's so long, or the booksellers were like, "What are you doing?" That kind of thing. And so it's the Prophecy of the Seventh Elizabeth, and then it's the Battle Between Light and Dark, Book 1, and then it's that whole name again, Book 2, which is the way that I really see it in my mind. So some people are like, "Well, that should be a subtitle, or that should just be the series title," but that's really what it is, and it is that whole thing, and that's what captures every piece of what the books are. So those are the actual names. The third book in that series is called Enoch, and should have come out in probably 2018.
No.
Should have come out in probably 2017. Maybe should have come out in 2016.
Is it half done, maybe?
Yeah, and it's about half done. It's one of those things where
it's just going to be a really, really good book.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it started out, and I'm sure other authors have done this as well, where it started out, and you had the full plan for it, and you thought, well, this is going to be maybe 100,000 word book, something like that. And you got to 100,000 words, and you're like, I'm like a quarter of the way through. So it's such a big book, and this is how God works. And I'm going to keep talking about your question. I'm going to answer your question, but this is how God works with me. I wasn't able to keep going forward in that because it was so big and there was so much to tackle. And it's a really complex book, but absolutely awesome the way the story comes together.
And the timeline plays a really important part in that one.
But exactly. So with the other series coming into play, with the 0 to 10 series, we decided to do prequels to that. And as I started writing the prequels, they were actually blending with the Enoch book, and they were important pieces of the Enoch puzzle as well, which is just amazing. And I think sometimes God will say, well, you know what, I don't need you to write that piece yet. I still have some more for you to develop over here so you can get that involved with it. And I think that's really, really significant. So the third book in that series, The Prophecy of the Seventh Elizabeth, would be the book Enoch, which is just extraordinary. And it involves Enoch from the Bible, seventh from Adam. And it also involves, dragons, other planets, and really cool things like that. So that's one series. Out of that series comes again the Acts of the Dragons, and currently, which is really special to me in another way, is because Isabella, my youngest daughter, actually helped to write a few of those books. So you'll see her name on those books. She's came up with some of the characters that are in there, which is really cool. So there's currently a lot of Acts of the Dragons books that are sitting there, and still ones to be written. So there's a New York collection, which is kind of all the ones that happen in New York City in Elizabeth's age 7. So you kind of got, like, again, you got to watch out for the timeline. You got to figure out what age was Elizabeth at this particular time. So let me see the other things that tie in from the other books for that, And it's kind of cool because it's a story that you may be mentioned in book 2, or character might be mentioned in book 2, but it's all expanded on in these extra books, and that's really what the Acts of the Dragons is about, to expand on all the other stuff that's inside that book. So then the series after that would be the Agents of Acts, and that book picks up at the end of book 2 at the same timeline, well, partially the same timeline of Enoch. And so there are things, and they actually go in 2 complete directions. So Elizabeth and them are doing one thing, and the Agents of Acts are solving another problem on Earth, which brings in the Confederation, which is an organization that's fighting part of the Unholy Trinity, and we figure out we're all on the same mission here. They're from another galaxy, but now the Agents of Acts will evolve and become a portion of that series, a different series, which will go into the 0 to 10. 0 to 10 is, I can't even begin. Yes, I can't even begin to sit there and talk about how awesome I feel 0 to 10 is. When it came to me, just talking about it makes me crack up. What
have you published of that so far that we can talk about here?
So what we published, what we did is we decided, instead of it's going to be 3 books is what we think.
I don't know.
So what we did is to try to keep it at 3 books. I said, well, there's a lot of characters, and if you like any of my books, you know that there's a lot of characters in my books. And it's fun to keep track of all those and see how they all interact. But since there's a lot of characters here, we needed to write some pre-stories. So there's a lot of short stories that will come out. And so the ones that are currently out, the first one that released was, and we call them origin stories. So they're kind of a mini series of themselves, origin stories. And out of the origin stories, the ones that have come out now is Zeta 6, which I like, because I like the story of how this being evolves into, and how they became what they are today. And it's really, really well put together. So Zeta 6, an origin story. And then Treya, an origin story, will come out in December, which this month. And then immediately following that, the third one that will come out there is Fayeva. And then there are 7 more that'll follow that. And so some of those are good guys and some of those are bad guys, and you're getting to learn those characters before you actually get to the actual book, so you know what their nature is, you know how they act, and we don't have to introduce them all inside of the 0 to 10, and we can actually you're
saving pages.
Yeah, we're saving pages, but we can just run with it. So there's a lot of storyline to tell inside of 0 to 10, and we can just run with it and do some really interesting things. But the other thing about the origin stories is there's a lot of cross stories in there. So there's characters like Shia, who extends from Enoch, which is in separate series, and goes across Agents of Axe, and then also ties into all the prequels for 0 to 10, or not all of them, but some of the prequels for 0 to 10, and then it'll be at some point in the 0 to 10 storyline, which is phenomenal. And there's like Yakin, Yakin is another one that'll be inside of.
I'm very excited to hear that one.
Yeah,
that one really told.
Yeah, that's gonna be cool. So Yakin, I mean, so the same thing. And so when you're reading those mini stories, it's just like, wow, I'm catching other pieces of this bigger picture, and so you kind of have to understand the whole universe, and it's phenomenal. And I don't know whether there'll be more after that, so we'll see what happens. So to answer, so those are the things that are there now. Now to answer your question, which is what's left for the series after this, or what else do we have planned? So we have ebooks and we have paperback books. So the thing that we really want to happen is we're going to start recording for the audio books early next year. So we're kind of putting together a team for that to make that happen. We don't want it to be just an author reading the books.
We want the voices to be different.
We want the voices to be different. We want more of it. It's kind of a lot of it's acted out. We want the sound effects in it. We want music in it. It'll have original scores. So I mean, it's
cool.
So I mean, it's we want it to be more of a production than just here's the author and he read it, and we want somebody to be able to listen to it in their car and and not want to stop driving. That's when you have a good book. So there's that. Ultimately, I would love to see all of the Agents of Axe, the Axe of the Dragons, and also the 0 to 10 miniseries there. I'd like to see those as cartoons. I mean, those would be really outstanding. We're big fans of our entire family is big fans of things like The Last Airbender, the cartoons. Legend of Korra, those types of things.
That type of animation style.
We like that kind of animation style, and we think that this would probably fit into that type of animation style. So
yeah, I could definitely see that. I could definitely, especially see some of the Axe of the Dragons when they're not going to say like the specific events, but I could definitely see a lot of that happening in that kind of animation style. So I wanted to go back to something that expanding on that, like, can you talk to us like maybe a little bit about what you have like planned for like your website, like selling like merchandise, things like that?
So on E7Prophecy.com that's our website. We put out information all the time. We usually blog once or twice a month on what's kind of going on. You can purchase books or get the links to go purchase books right on the site. We sell on Amazon, we sell on Barnes & Noble, and we're looking into just a few other places to sell as well. And we'll certainly put that information out. But if you want to keep current and up to date and even see some sneak previews of different things and possibly some even free ebooks and things like that sitting on there, then you definitely want to keep track of E7Prophecy.com or E7Universe.com as well. Either one works.
Yeah, and so that's where if you were going to sell like t-shirts, like the ones you're wearing, things like that, if you were going to do that, it would be on that website?
That's correct, yeah.
All right, cool. And we're wearing cool t-shirts right now. So they got the names of all the series on the back, and it's really cool.
Good.
Okay, I wanted to kind of go back to something that you said earlier about, how you wrote some of the Axe of the Dragons with your youngest child, Isabella, my little sister. what was that experience like to write that with her?
So, I mean, to me, it's special because I think even when I first started, I knew that the Axe Dragons were kind of going to be there at some point. I figured that out, and I thought the characters in the four main characters in the book are really based upon my children. And how awesome would it be to have my children actually write a portion of those stories, you know, and put their influence inside of it. So it was really cool that Isabella wanted to do some of that. And you know, my oldest daughter, Kari, and you know, you're kind of a sounding board for a lot of the things that we do. So actually, I think if there's anybody else that knows the majority of everything that's there,
that's why I'm really trying not to like talk about a bunch of the things that we talked about, because there's so much good stuff coming up.
Yeah. So I mean, like Dr. Poison is going to come out at some point next year, and
that's one of the 0 to 10.
That's one of the 0 to 10 books, and that's something that you're gonna that you'll be writing a large portion of. So, or writing a portion of. So, and I think those, to me, it's very special to have all of my kids involved. And I have, you know, I should say that I have talented children, and, you know, they're good at doing characters. They're good at coming up with, like, you know, what's the strength of this particular person, or, you know, what can they be defeated by, you know, all those types of things. They're really good at those things, and great at giving feedback as well. Yeah. And then I should mention also that my wife Lisa has edited so far every one of the books.
Yeah, from the very beginning.
Which is extremely important to say, because it's really a family effort. Everybody's kind of involved, and you guys all have to listen to the rough drafts, you know, and it's kind of hard to listen to a rough draft with like all the misspelled words and things like that inside of it. So,
well, I mean, yeah, but now we have like valuable copies for like when everything really.
Yeah, there you go.
And so it is really nice that you know, that it's not. It is a family effort. Yeah. So that's great. And can you tell us like a little bit about how you juggle like creating this incredible series, this incredible universe, while also working full time and parenting 4 children, and you also work at the local church, and you know, how do you find time to write?
So this is a really good question, because and I think other people who are you know, starting out as being an author, they might run through the same thing. You know, I've got a full-time job. How do I find time to write that? And one of the things I like to say is just write that first draft. It doesn't matter if it's clean or looks good or if it's got misspelled words. Just get that first draft out, because that's when you can come back and actually correct it all and make it happen. And, you know, for me, how do you juggle all of that? It's been a blessing to be, I think it's a blessing to be in the roles that I'm in. I'm a developer, and one of the things that as a developer that I've learned over the years is how to be able to work on something when I'm not actually working on it. Mm-hmm. So you're driving in a car and you're solving a problem in your head, and there's a lot of people that can do that. And for me, those moments when you know, the book comes in, I remember all that. You know, you don't necessarily get a piece of the book and then forget that piece of the book. You get the piece of the book and it's like there, you know, and you can't get rid of it until you go and write it down. So you know, once you do find that time, which is hard to do, once you do find that time, then you can put it on paper. But I will say this, you know, I find that when I realize that I've got that time to write, that everything else in the world will try to stop me from writing at that time. Yeah. You know, and I believe that's one of the tricks of the devil. You know, I believe that this is a blessed series. I believe that this is something that should be written. I believe that this is something that people should hear. I believe that it gives people avenues to see fiction that is, you know, clean read, but also somewhat inspirational.
Yeah,
that is not your typical Christian type book. You know, it's not necessarily not there's anything wrong with any other type of Christian book, but it's not your typical Christian book. Some of the comments that we get are things like, you know, I read through the whole book, and then I realized there was no cuss words in it, and I was like, I had to go back and check just to make sure. You know, and I think that's really cool, because we have opinions on whether those things really need to be inside of a book, you know. And so I think when I do get those times to write, then I think, you know, the enemy is always trying to stop you from producing something that you were gifted to do. And I think you should, you know, that everyone really should recognize, not just if you're an author, but in your own realm, you know, God gives you gifts and wants you to use those gifts. Whether that's being a musician, whether that's being an author, whether it's being a homemaker, whether it's homeschooling, you know, no matter what it is, God gives you gifts to be able to do stuff. And when you find something trying to pull you from that gift, don't get upset at it. Just recognize that this is just the enemy trying to stop you from doing one of the things that God built you to do, and then focus and try to get it done, you know. And sometimes you just have to break through a wall. I don't think I have problems with things like writer's block. I think more so it would be, you know, time block. You know, how do you get that time back? And you know, you could say, you mentioned that I work at the church also. You could say, you know, why do that extra thing? You know, just write the book. Why put that extra time in on a weekend and you know, ruin your whole weekend? Because, I mean, because God made you could do all of those things. You know, it's not something that has to hold you back. I find more inspiration from going to this church and hearing, you know, we've been blessed to have several very, 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 very gifted pastors over our lifetime. And hearing them preach a sermon, I get something out of that, and I turn around and all of a sudden that's in my book. You know, so I mean, it's just that way. It's just the way it works. So I just fight those urges to not do it and just go ahead and do it.
Awesome. And that goes into another question I had, which was, what advice would you have for new authors and trying to create a world like this? Yeah.
So I mean, some authors, they have many books that are completely unrelated. Some authors have one book in them, and that's the one they're supposed to get out. You know, some are fiction, some are nonfiction. I say if you feel like there's a book inside of you, just write it. You know, get that first draft out and let it sit for a little while, and then come back and go through it again. Don't take that first draft and try to send it out to get it published or something like that. And honestly, don't, in today's world, you know, you can make a lot of money being a published author through a publisher who already has several books out there that are super famous. You can do that. Or you're more concerned about just, I want people to read my book. You know what I mean? I don't really care. I have a book to write and I need to get it written. I'm not in it for the money. So usually if you're going to be an author, try not to be in it for the money, because you don't want to be disappointed about that. And, you know, get it written, step away from it, then go back and revisit it, and you know, you'll find that you're going to pull more out of it that second time through, and maybe even a third time through if necessary. But at some point in time, put that book out. There's super awesome avenues of getting it done. Amazon, it's so easy to publish a book on Amazon. It's insane. Keep in mind that bookstores and you know, print on demand, and there's bookstores. Print on demand is kind of hurting the bookstores. So if you're someone who's involved in print on demand like I am, then try to make appearances at bookstores and take your books to the bookstores. You know, get extra copies made and take them and try to put them inside of a bookstore as well. And there's a lot of small booksellers, so not maybe the Barnes and Nobles of the world. Although Barnes and Noble is really good about helping you and doing book signings and things like that. They're very, very, very friendly and very good with that. But there's a lot of small bookstores, mom and pop bookstores, half price bookstore is one. You know, talk to those people and meet with them and go in, and they're more than willing to bring you in and do some good stuff. The other thing that I would say to people is you really
also try to get them in libraries.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. Very, very good. Get them in libraries and things like that. But the one thing I would say is, don't be discouraged if you don't get a lot of reviews. Okay. Because if you go out and do the math, okay, and you go look at someone who's written a super famous book, well, let's just say they sold 1 million copies, but they're only going to have like 20,000 reviews on Amazon or any given place. You know, they might have some more, but it's still not going to be a million reviews.
Yeah.
You know, so not every person that reads your books is going to review it. Don't take that to heart. Don't and you know, any review is good, whether it's a bad review or a good review, because you take a bad review and you learn from it and you keep going.
Yeah.
You know, so when I go and I look and I think, well, gosh, you know, this particular book only has 15 reviews. Well, I mean, I've only sold, you know, so many. So if you do the math again, you're on the same percentage as everyone else. Yeah. You know, so don't worry too much about it. Don't let things get you down, and keep it moving. And don't be afraid to rewrite your book once you've released it. So you know, at some point in time, I decided, wow, I kind of like having pictures in my book as well.
Yeah.
We do a lot of artwork, and I thought, you know, why not have the artwork in the book as well? So, you know, I'll at some point we'll be going back to book 1 and adding additional artwork into that as well.
Yeah.
You know, so you don't think it's the end just because you push the release button. Go do your thing.
Yeah, and that actually is a perfect segue into my next question about, I mean, since you mentioned re-releasing books, you've re-released book 1, and I think you just originally released book 2 with these new, with covers with characters on them. So could you talk a little bit about those, and about, like, I don't know if you can really see it in the video, but we've got, like, this display going of these amazing pictures that you create. How do you, like, do you want to talk about that at all?
So one thing that helps me when I'm writing is I get a vision of these, like I said, movies in my brain, and I would like to see that and keep that in front of me. And so I was blessed to be able to be okay with doing artwork and things like that, and so I go and I make characters for them, and I make them into the full promo of that character. And it's easier to describe something that you can see than something that you can't see. And so I put those characters and I have them there, and they're in front of me all the time. You know, they're my screensavers, they're my backgrounds, they're all that, because it keeps the story going in my head, you know, and you see new things about it all the time. So, you know, having the artwork in the series that we've created are they've gotten better along the way.
Yeah,
you know, it gets better along the way. So at some point in time, you're thinking, wow, I'd like to go back and do that first book over, you know. So go redo that, and that's how the characters end up on there. So
yeah, and just so that they know, I mean, that is you doing all of that.
Oh yeah, I do all the artwork. If there's music involved on any of the promos that you see or anything like that, I do all the music for it.
Yeah.
And of course the majority of the writing. So.
Yeah. So for my final question, I just wanted to ask, you know, is there a main message that readers should take from the journey of the Set family?
So the message that I hope is taken from there, and there's probably a lot of messages, but I think the message that I hope is taken from there is that no matter how bad a situation seems like it's going to be, that it's okay to trust in God.
Yeah.
To see you through that. And the character that really has to endure that, I think, is the father, Jonathan. You know, he's gone through this horrific event in book 1, and he's an FBI agent, and he doesn't turn into a vigilante.
No.
You know, he doesn't go out on his own and you know, just start trying to kill everybody in the world. You know, he doesn't enforce his law with a gun. You know, there's a scene in book 1 where he interrupts a robbery. Him and his partner interrupt a robbery, and it's kind of funny as well. But the thing that happens is the scene's really kind of cool how they get the robbers, or get the people safe and get to the robbers. And he gets to drop on the robber with his gun, and he looks at him and he says, you know, and this won't be an exact quote, but he says, you know, are you saved? You know, and the guy kind of looks at him and he says, I need to know whether you're saved or not before I have to kill you. You know, you know, so he's more concerned about, you know, I don't want to kill this guy before he, you know, unless he gets saved first, you know, which is kind of a joke, and it's kind of a play on you know, Clint Eastwood and one of those types of movies or something like that. But that's how his character is. He's first and foremost concerned about someone's soul, even if they've done something bad. So, you know, after he arrests this guy, he comes back to him a little bit later, and he goes into the police car. And in Jacksonville, one of the cool and this event takes place in Jacksonville, and one of the things that the Jacksonville Police Department does, and it could be everybody, I don't really know, and maybe it's only some officers in the Jacksonville Police Office. I just know that they do this. They'll play like CDs of pastors who are local pastors and things like that in their car if they have like a person locked up in the back of their car or something like that, you know. And so the guy's locked up in the back of the car. He comes over, he talks to the police officer for a little bit, and he says, "Okay, go." And he opens the door to the thing, and he says, you know, "Hey, what's your name?" You know, and the guy tells him his name and everything. He said, "What do they call you?" You know, he says, you know, and he explains to him, he introduces him to Christ, you know, because the guy's not saved. He's not been saved. So he introduces him to Christ. This guy's about to face and go into jail. I mean, he's on his way to jail, no doubt, you know, and he's introducing him to Christ. And he says, you know, "I'm going to come down and visit you tomorrow, and I'm going to introduce you to someone at the jailhouse or wherever, you know, the lockup, the clink, you know. I'm gonna introduce you to someone there who's going to help you."
Yeah.
And that character's name is Robert. And or the person who's going to jail, his name is Robert. And then you'll see him return and later in like an Acts of the Dragon series, and you can see how he'll talk about how that moment, that one interaction, helped him and redirected his life. And I think if there's another message that I need to convey to everybody, it's that your interaction with one person, you don't know what effect that has on someone, you know. And so there's a book that will come out, which will be Elizabeth taking a bus ride, a city bus ride. And I won't tell you how she gets to that. I don't know why she takes the bus ride or those types. but she interacts with the people there. And so if there's someone who you don't know what people have gone through, you don't know what they're doing or what they're about to do, you know, or what happened to them or what their past was or what their present is. You just don't know. And so how you interact with them should be the best possible interaction that you can do with them. And so she introduces herself to, say, a person who recently has had a death. You know, her husband passed away. And in that, she changes that person in that moment so that they're on a different direction now when they leave. And she talks to, you know, other people on that bus. But I mean, just imagine, you know, and I've done everyone has done stupid things in their life. I've done some stupid things in my life, you know, and imagine, you know, when I was a kid, we tried to be funny about everything. So we'd be in a McDonald's, you know what I mean, and we try to be funny about it, and funny to us, maybe not funny to everyone else, you know what I mean. And if you say something insulting to someone, you don't know what effect it has on that person from that moment on, because you don't see them after that. You say something rude, you turn around, you walk out the store, you know. And if you stop and think about that a minute, if I'm going to leave someone with an impression, if I'm going to interact with someone, shouldn't I just make it the best interaction possible? Should I not try to improve someone's day versus unimprove someone's day? You know. So I mean, imagine saying, "Hey, you know, something rude to a cashier or something like that," just because, you know, you don't know whether they were having a bad day, you don't know what their tomorrow is going to be like. I mean, think about all the avenues that could happen there. You know, this person goes in because that's the one last thing that they needed to hear, and now they're gonna commit suicide. Or that's the one last thing that they needed to hear, and now they're distracted for the rest of the day, and then other bad things happen because of that, or bad decisions. You know, versus something you could have said that's good. Now, I know there's no guarantee that someone, just because you said something good to someone, it's going to change it for a positive direction or save their life or do anything like that. But it's more possible than if you say something negative to them. You know what I mean? So why not go down that path instead? And if there's one thing another thing that's, like I said, that people could take away from this book, it's to see how Elizabeth interacts with people and how she talks to them. And a lot of times when something prophetic is about to happen, she starts off with, "God has a message for you," you know, and she captures your attention, you know. And so in the Robbie Peterson exchange, one of the Acts of the Dragons books, one that Isabella helped with, you know, there's there's this boy, Robbie Peterson, and throughout the entire book, he talks to his stepfather and he calls him by his name, Greg. And that could be normal for families across the world, you know. And Elizabeth, and he doesn't really appreciate him because he's still attached to his father who has passed away, you know. And so he's got this hurdle he needs to get over. And these are not spoilers because this has nothing to do with the book. This is just an event that's in there. It's an interaction, and it could go actually unnoticed if you're just reading through the book, you know. And she says to him at one point, she says, "I noticed that you call your father, your stepfather by his name, but your stepsister calls your mother mom, you know." And she says, "God has a message for you." And she tells him, you know, God is not trying to replace your father with another person. He's giving you another good man who's very kind to your mother, and da-da-da-da, and so on and so forth. And she's trying to let him know this is not a bad thing that there's this man here. It is a great thing that this man is here to help you. You know, and it that one interaction changes his life. Yeah. You know, and I think those things are really, really kind of cool. You know, and you know, you'll see in later books down the road where Robbie is older, how that interaction really did change something in his life and put him on a different path. You know, so I think those are things that I'd like people to take away from the book.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of great messages to take away from all of the series.
It's complex. There's a lot there.
Yeah, there's a lot. Awesome. Well, thank you for doing this interview today.
Thank you for doing the interview with me.
You're welcome.